Okay, good morning. In the previous session, we discussed about the sensor node and then what are the components of sensor node. Now we are going to know about the sensor, different types of sensor, and then different categories of sensor nodes. Here, coming to the sensor node, that means you will know the sensor node is a mode. Here, also known as a mode. Here it is a node in a sensor network. Here, what are the special? If you see here, right side diagram, there is a wireless sensor network. Here it is connected to the internet. Some nodes are there. If you see here, the sensor node, different sensor nodes available here. The user connected to the internet. From the internet here, sensor nodes. Here, what is the capability of sensor node in this case? The capability of sensor node used for processing sensor information and then communication. Here, that is a capability of sensor node. Here, it is used for performing the some processing and gather the information and communicate with other connected nodes in a network. Here, in this case, mode is a node, but node is not a mode. Why? Because mode in the sense a sensor node. The sensor node having a some features. What are the future? Processing features, sensory information, communication features are there. But here node does not. That's why mode is a node, but node is not a mode. Here components of sensor node. Here what are the different components for the sensor node? Already discussed those components: microcontroller, transceiver, external memory, power source, one or more sensor nodes. If it comes to the controller here what are the specialty of controller? Controller performs tasks, processing data, and then controls functionality of other components in a sensor node. Here it will controls the other component functionality. While most of controllers is a microcontroller. Here that can be used as a controllers or general purpose desktop microprocessor or digital signal or FPGA and S6. Here these are different information about the controllers. Okay, we will discuss already discussed that information. The wireless control network. How can you use this particular controllers? Here coming to the second important one, transceiver. The transceiver is a sensor node. Here this one also one of the it's a one component in a sensor node. Here sensor node make use of ISAM band, which gives a free radio spectrum allocation and global availability. The wireless transmission media are some of the media is there: radio frequency, optical communication, and then infrared. Here this is a that means open your transceiver. That means it will transmit, receive, idle, sleep states. It's performing a different state. The transmit and receive both together in a one place. That is called here transceiver. Here coming to the external memory. Here from energy perspective, the most relevant kind of memory are on-chip memory of the microcontroller, on-chip memory, and then flash memory, RAM memory. These are all different memories. Here, if it comes to the flash memories, are used due to their cost and storage capability. The memory requirements are very much application dependent. That means the requirements of memory depends upon your application. You are based on your application, based on your application size. Then you will selecting the memory. And then two categories of memory based on the purpose of storage are user memory and then program memory. User memory for storing the application related personal data. Program memory used for programming the devices. The program memory consists of identification data of other devices. Here, this is a some information regarding the external memory. This is one of the components in a sensor node. And then power source. If it comes to the power source, the left hand side, you will identify the one of the component power source. Here wireless sensor node is a popular solution when it is difficult to run a sub, that means to sensor node. Here wireless difficult here, why is it difficult here or impossible to run a main supply to the sensor node. However, since wireless sensor nodes placed in a hard to reach location, that means what is the need here? That means what the power source in a sense battery. Battery is a, if you comes to the mobile phone, you are placing the battery in a hard to reach location, very difficult to reach location. Changing the battery regularity can be costly and inconvenient. The power source, there is always adequate energy available to the power source system. The sensor node consumes power for, that means different purposes. The sensor node will consume power for sensing, communicating, data processing. For these purposes, the sensor node will consume some power. More energy is required for the data communication than any other processes. Here communicating data from one node to another node, if you want to transfer the data from one node to another node, it required more power compared to the sensing, communication, and then different things. And then the another important component here, the last and final component in a sensor node, sensor. Here what is a sensor? Here sensor measures the physical quantity. If you see here, the right diagram identifies the different kinds of sensor. What are the different kinds of hardware sensor? What is the specialty of this sensor? Here sensor always measures the some physical quantity and convert that measurement reading into a digital representation. Here it takes the physical quality, it takes the temperature, converted into whatever may be the required. That is the digital representation. That is a sensor, and then the digital representation passed to another device for transformation into useful data that can be consumed by intelligent device or humans. Here it will pass to the another device. What is the need here? In order to getting the transformation into useful data, in order to getting the transformation into useful data that can be consumed by the intelligent devices or human. Sensors are not limited to human like a sensor data. Here these sensors are human like a sensor data. And then the sensors provide a superhuman sensory capability. Here the sensor can be embedded in any physical object that are easily converted to the internet by wired or wirelessness network. The sensors can interpret their environment and make intelligent decision. Interpret the environment in the sense it takes humidity, converted it into some form of information. That form of information transferred to the other devices. For getting the useful information or for making the intelligent decision, you are using this number of sensors. Here the sensors used by wireless sensor networks to capture the data from their environment. If you see the first diagram, that is called here wireless sensor network. That wireless sensor network consists of n number of sensor nodes. Here, what is the necessity of n number of sensor nodes here? Capture the data from an environment. They are these sensors may be hardware devices that produce a measurable response to change physical condition like a temperature. That means if you want to change the physical condition, you are using the temperature, pressure. If you want to change the pressure, you are using the this type of sensor. This type of sensor. Here, some of the sensors consist of necessary electronics. That means the sensor having the necessary electronics to convert the raw signal into readings. Here, any raw signal into reading which can be retrieved via digital link. That means that may be a interface I2C SPI. Most sensor nodes are small in size. Here, all different sensor nodes are small in size. For example, if you see here, these are all sensor nodes. These are all sensors. Here, this sensor small in size and consumes little energy, operate in high volumetric densities. Here, that means those are all in small size, but work is more. And then the sensors are classified into three categories. And that means based on different things, you are divided into categories, different categories. One is a passive, other one is a active sensors. Passive sensor mali omni directional sensor, narrow beam sensor, and active sensor. Here coming to the first one, passive sensor. What is a passive sensor? The passive sensor sends the data without actually manipulating the environment by active probing. That is a passive sensor. That means without manipulating the environment by active probing, they are self-powered. That means that is energy is needed to amplify their analog signal. That means sometimes you require amplify the analog signal, you are using this type of sensor. Coming to the active sensor, active sensor probe, that means actively probe the environment. For example, a sonar or radar sensor, they require continuous energy from a power sources. For these purposes, you are using the active sensor. That means the continuous. That means the continuous monitoring, the continuous energy, the continuous required continuous energy. Such cases, sonar, so radar systems, you are using the active sensor. The narrow beam sensor, it is a passive sensors, have a well defined here their direction measurement. Here notion direction measurement similar to the camera. That means the narrow beam is a similar to the camera here. The motion not a n and notion kaadu, motion of the direction of measurement. And then omni directional sensors have a no motion direction. That is a thing. And coming to the different types of sensor, the sensor type, these are all categories. In the category, some of the sensors are active sensors, some of the sensors are passive sensor. Based on the certain types, different types of sensors are there. Here, what are the different types of sensor? You are using a IoT system. Here, temperature sensor, not limited to the temperature sensor, positional sensor, and then occupancy motion sensor, and then velocity acceleration sensor, and then force sensor, pressure sensor, and then flow data, not a data flow, water flow sensor, like the different flow sensor, acoustic sensor, humidity sensor, and then light sensor, and then radiation sensor, and then chemical, and so on. These are all different types of sensor available. This may be a, some of the sensors may be passive sensor, some of the sensors may be active sensor. Coming to the first kind of sensor, here is a temperature sensor. Here it is used to measuring, that means taking the temperature, converted into digital format. Here if you see the right side diagram, you are available the different types of temperature sensor. The temperature sensor measures the amount of heat or cold that is present in a system. That means in order to measuring the amount of heat, that means always taking the heat. This sensor always taking the heat, and or sometimes some of the sensor taking the cold present in a system and convert it into digital format. Here that heat converted in digital format. That means not only converting the digital format here, converted in digital format and send the data into some other device for understanding the human, for useful for the human or useful for some other purposes. Here the temperature sensor broadly classified into two types: contact temperature sensor, non-contact temperature sensor. You are coming to the first type of sensor. Here is a contact sensor type sensor. Contact temperature sensor. The contact temperature sensor need to be in physical contact. with object being sensed. Here, with the help for the physical context, you are using this type of sensor. And then non-contact sensor. Non-contact sensor do not need a physical contact. That means without, for example, contact sensor in the sense you need a physical contact. But here it's not, no need of the physical contacts. Do not need the physical contact, non-contact sensor. They measure the temperature by using convection and radiation. By using convection and radiation, that means no need of contact. Without no need of contact, you are measuring the different temperature information. Thermometer is a one type of sensor. A calorimeter, temperature gauge. Here, these are all different example for the sensor. Thermometer. Most probably, you know the thermometer. In the thermometer, you will identify the this type of sensor for measuring the temperature. For measuring the temperature of human, here thermometer. And then coming to the position sensor. Here, what is a position sensor? The position sensor measures the position of an object. The position where it is, the position of an object. The position measurement can be either absolute position or relative position. Absolute in the sense absolute value. For example, exact place. Relatively. For example, best example I am telling you, absolute number, relative number. The absolute number of 2.3, that's a 2. Absolute, the relative is a relative may be different. 2.2 in the sense 2.2. Here, the position measurement can be either an absolute term or it may be a relative term. Absolute term in the sense it's having the absolute position sensor. The displacement for this one, the relative term, you are using the displacement center sensor. Here, the position sensors can be a linear, angular, or multi-axis. For example, these are all different examples for the positional sensor. Proximity sensor, potentiometer, inclinometer. These are all different example for the position sensor. Here coming to the occupancy motion sensor. Here the occupancy motion sensor detect the presence of people and animals in the surveillance area. The presence here the what are the people existed in this particular area. If you comes to the position, it will identify the position. CC camera, CC camera, and CC camera also you are using the position sensor or occupancy sensor. The presence of people and animal in the area. While motion sensor detect the motion of the people in a object. What is the main difference between occupancy sensor and motion sensor? The occupancy sensor here generate a signal. That means occupancy sensor will generate a signal even the person is in stationary, while motion sensor will not. Here, for example, occupancy in the sense if a person is sit there or he will stand there without motion. But the occupancy sensor will generate a signal. But whereas the motion sensor cannot generate the signal. If a person is in idle state, here it will not generate a signal. That is the difference between that means both are identifying the presence of the people, animal. For example, electronic eye, radar, these two are the occupancy motion sensor. Here identify the this is a occupancy sensor. Velocity acceleration sensor. Here important one, velocity acceleration sensor. Here velocity in the sense speed of motion. Here that is a speed of motion. Here this velocity sensor may be linear, angular, indicating how fast an object moves. How fast an object moves along with a straight line, or how fast it rotates. That means it will identify the fastness of an object, the fastness of object along with the straight line, or the fastness of object that means rotation, how much fast the object rotates. That kind of information identified by the velocity sensor. Acceleration sensor measure the changes in a velocity, the change value in a velocity. For example, accelerometer, gyroscope. These two are the velocity sensors. Important one here is a force sensor. Here, what is a force sensor? The force sensor always force. That means physical force is applied. Whether the that means identify the whether physical force applied or not. Whether the magnitude of the force is beyond the threshold or not. Here, for identifying the those factors, the physical force, whether this physical force applied or not, or whether this the magnitude of force is beyond the threshold. That means threshold in the sense, for example, you are giving some value. For example, the threshold. For example, I am giving the salary for the threshold more than. For example, I am giving the taking the 2 lakhs salary for the threshold. For example, in India, the what is the threshold here? The salaries of all employees less than the president's salary, less than this president's salary. Is it correct or not? That means, for example, the president's salary 2 lakhs. If all government employees' salary beyond that range, the what is the threshold here? 2 lakhs is a threshold. When the threshold, you will do the physical force applied and the magnitude force are beyond the threshold. For example, force gauge, and then for example tactile sensor, that means touch sensors. These are all different types of sensor. Coming to the pressure sensor, the pressure sensor related to the force sensor and measures the force applied by gases. Whatever that means, will you identify the difference here? Force sensor in the sense a physical force, but here gas, the the pressure sensor, just like a pressure cooker. That means identify the force. Here, the pressure sensor related to the force sensor. That means I think that measure the force applied by the liquids and then gases. The pressure is measured in terms of force per unit area. That is a pressure sensor. For example, for the barometer, Bowden, Bowden gauge, piezometer, these are all pressure sensor. Just like a force sensor, pressure cooker. In the pressure cooker, you apply the pressure sensor. Then it will get a whistle. Flow sensor. The flow sensor detect the rate of fluid flow. That means water flow, fluid flow. Like that, in order to getting the flow of a fluids, you will use a flow sensor. Here they measure the volume, mass flow, or rate flow velocity of fluid. The fluids mass flow, fluid flow velocity measured by using flow sensor. Here the flow sensor has a passed via a system in a given period of time. For example, anometer, mass flow sensor, water meter. Water meter. Here the diagram indicates the water meter. The flow, water flow meter. This is a flow sensor, acoustic sensor. Acoustic sensor measures the sound levels and convert that information into digital or analog signal. For example, microphone, geophone, hydrophone, like that. These are all different acoustic. Whatever may be the voice that converted into the information into digital image, digital or analog signal. That is, a, for example, sometimes acoustic echo voice sometimes. Whatever may be the voice you delivered by you, that comes into your ear. That's called here echo voice. The acoustic sensor measure the sound levels. Whatever may be the sound levels, that levels it converts to sound level and converted into information into the convert the information into digital or analog signals. Here these are all different example for the acoustic sensor, humidity sensor. Humidity sensor detect the humidity in the air or mass. Humidity, that means amount of water vapor, amount of water vapor in a air. The humidity levels can be measured in various ways: absolute humidity, relative humidity, mass ratio, and so on. For example, hydrometer, humidimeter, soil moisture sensor, soil wet, identifying the wet levels. You will use a soil moisture sensor. That means in a soil, the wet level, for identifying the wet level, you will use a soil sensor. And then light sensor. Here right side diagram indicates the light sensor. What is the specialty of light sensor? Detect the presence of light, visible or invisible, identifying the visibility of particular light. In order to identify the visibility of particular light, you are using the light sensor. That means so many projects you are using the IR sensor, infrared sensor, photo detector sensor, flame detector sensor, like that. These are all are example for the light sensor. Radiation sensor. Here radiation sensor detects the radiation in an environment. Here that means radiation. Identify if you comes to the factor is the radiation, a high level radiation is there. In particular cases, you are using radiation sensor can be sensed by the some detection. For example, these are a different example for the sensors. Here coming to the chemical sensor. The chemical sensor measures the concentration of the chemicals in a system. Here, this may be subject to target down type. For example, CO2 sensor sense the only carbon dioxide. For example, for the different example for the chemical sensors, these are all chemical. Smoke detector is a chemical sensor. It detecting the smoke in a environment. Here, the very important thing in this case, the sensor node types. Here, the sensor nodes divided into four different groups. Here, the sensor nodes classified into four different groups. What are the four different groups here? A specialized sensing node, a specialized sensing node, generic sensing node, high bandwidth sensing node, gateway node. These all the four different categories are not a categories here, groups divided into different groups. Here coming to the specialized sensing node. Here, what is a specialized sensing node? A smart specialized sensing nodes are preferred for special purpose devices. Here, intelligent generic sensing node preferred for generic function. For connectivity and function, high-end smart bandwidth sensing nodes and then gateway nodes are preferred here. What is the specialty here? A smart specialized sensing nodes are preferred for a special purpose devices. Here for the special purpose devices, you are utilizing these specialized sensing nodes. Coming to the generic sensing nodes, intelligent generic sensing nodes preferred for generic function. For the generating the different generic functions, here you are using this generic sensing nodes. And then high bandwidth sensing node, cluster head. It is a cluster head is a high bandwidth sensing node used for performing data fusion, data aggregation functions in a wireless sensor network. Based on a system requirement application, there will be more than one cluster head inside the cluster. That is a thing here. The high bandwidth sensing node. Coming to the last and final one here is a gate node. Here for interconnectivity functions, high-end smart bandwidth sensing node and gateway nodes are preferred for interconnectivity functions. For the interconnectivity, if any node is in fail, that means is in wireless sensor network fails. If any node in a network fail, to exchange data with other nodes, it should be informed with delay to the base station or gateway node. Here, that means for this purpose, for informing, for example, some nodes failed in a network. How can you get that information? By using this gateway node. These are all different sensor nodes categories. Here, the references, you will go to the Wikipedia. Okay, thank you.